I'm Michael Barone.
And I'm Byron York at a Marriott somewhere in America, actually in Boulder, Colorado, where they've just had the Republican debate. And boy, it was actually a newsy one, and not just because the moderators were a disaster, but there's been, I think, real movement in this field. Jeb went down, Marco Ted doing well, Christie doing well, Trump Carson kind of getting along. Michael, what did you see as the biggest thing that happened in this debate?
Well, I think the biggest thing that happened in this debate, I go back to John Quincy Adams, our sixth president.
That's a long way.
He expected, well, I always like to look at history, who expected that Cuba would someday be part of the United States. Well, that hasn't quite happened yet, but it was a very good night, I think, in Boulder for the two Cuban-American candidates, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. They came out swinging. They spoke quite adroitly and directed their ire and that of the audience and that of many Republican viewers out there at the dreaded mainstream media. And I think so. They did so very effectively, and I think they were clearly the stars of this debate. A lot of polls nationally and in the early states have showed them sort of inching to the top of the non-Trump Carson pack of candidates, and I think they both strengthened their position last night.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Cruz had the moment of the night. If there was one moment that was just bigger than anything else, it was when he took on the moderators and said, look at these ridiculous questions.
The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media. This is not a cage match. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain? Ben Carson, can you do math? John Kasich, will you insult two people over here? Marco Rubio, why don't you resign? Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen? How about talking about the substantive issues people care about?
Beautifully done. I must just say masterfully done. Just got a huge response from the audience in Denver.
I would disagree with you slightly, only that I think that Marco Rubio had the best exchange of the night without derogating Ted Cruz's comments at all.
Well, I think
Rubio in his exchange with Jeb Bush and the whole
is less popular than knocking down the entire mainstream media. So I would.
Well, exactly. He's segued very adroitly from the question intended to put him on the defensive about his absences in the Senate. And to using some examples of how the media has done double standards in the past for Republicans and Democrats, and I think came across very strongly and showed a mastery and sense of command over his former mentor, political ally, Governor Jeb Bush. He said, I admire Governor Bush, but he did quite a job at that point. What was the mood in the press room? How did mainstream media take its scolding from the Republican candidates? Byron?
You know, it's interesting. You have to remember there are two factors at work. One is that everybody's in the press, and some of them have kind of that's our team mentality, and they don't like some of these whacks on CNBC. On the other hand, the people who were involved in television, there were a number of them from competing teams. There were CNN people there. There were Fox people there. There were CBS people there. There were others there. And I have to tell you, just having informal conversations with a lot of people, not for the record at all, press people, they just thought it was a disaster. Maybe the ones who didn't even believe it was liberal bias just thought it was very ineptly done.
A disaster for CNBC. And the
for CNBC.
Yeah, I was sort of astonished at the way that the questioners would come in and interrupt in mid-question and disagree with the premises.
Yeah, and they also were not terribly well prepared, and that was just, for example, think what you may about Anderson Cooper. He was remarkably well prepared for that Democratic debate, just seemed to have information on everything at his fingertips. Not so the CNBC team. Now, on some of the other candidates, I thought there was an interesting dynamic going on between Donald Trump and Ben Carson. Basically, Ben Carson had said at the top of the debate, as he said many times before, I'm not going to attack anybody. I'm just not into attacks. And this time, Trump seemed to go along with that and did not go after Carson. I think Trump has seen that there's a bit of Teflon around Carson. Not a good idea to go after him. One interesting tidbit, I spoke to Carson's campaign manager afterwards, and he said he and Trump's campaign manager, quote, talk regularly. I don't know what they're talking about, but these two campaigns are not mortal enemies right now.
Well, they're not mortal enemies, and one of the things Donald Trump recognizes, and he did go after one candidate, John Kasich, unafraid about the Eastern European ethnic vote, apparently. But he is that Ben Carson is really beloved by the Republican electorate. What polls taken show that he's got the highest percentage of people saying that he would be an acceptable winner of the nomination to them. I think there's an attraction among Republican voters as well for African American candidates. They bristle at the idea that they're racist because they oppose the programs of Barack Obama and voted against him and voted for other candidates. And they like the idea of an African American candidate who stands up for their positions on issues. And the other thing we're seeing in the polls in Iowa, and we've seen it in some states like Texas and Oklahoma, it seems like many Christian conservatives who are supporting Trump in about equal percentages as other segments of the Republican primary electorate are now gravitating towards Ben Carson, who of course has a religious component to his message. And that's helping Carson achieve rough equality with Donald Trump in the polls.
Almost the co-leader. Okay, now before we go, though, two more candidates who I thought did make an impression, probably helped themselves last night. Christie, who, as we all know, had been given up for dead a while back, and seemed to have a pretty strong night. And he got in the media bashing as well, telling CNBC that even in New Jersey, what you're doing would be called rude. So that's really rude. But had a good night, and I also thought that Mike Huckabee had a pretty good night. Huckabee has been sliding in the polls, and he has taken this position strongly against Christie and others on entitlement reform. He does not want to touch Social Security and Medicare. Also rolled out a kind of an interesting disease-based argument about Medicare, saying if you, instead of cutting Medicare, if you just had big government programs against diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, you would save an enormous amount of money in Medicare costs. So I thought Huckabee did pretty well for himself.
I would say one other thing, Byron, in closing, we're just about out of time here, is that the Republicans, of course, were complaining about media bias. I think they had a very strong basis for doing so. But I think in some ways it helped them. It helped them make the case that it gave them that the media is against them. It helped give them practice against a hostile media. The Constitution guarantees us a free press. It doesn't guarantee us a fair one, and it's always going to be tilted against Republicans in our lifetimes. But what the Republicans were able to bring out were some good issue positions. You had crony capitalism denounced by several candidates with very good specifics. Carly Fiorina did an excellent job of this. And you also had deft defenses of entitlement reform, partly in response to the Huckabee comments that you referenced, that will be good practice for whoever the Republican nominee is in the general election. So, Byron, thank you for coming in from Boulder. I hope you're not having too bad an effect from the altitudes. And to our audience, we will see you next week.